Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's. At that time, you may press star one on your phone to ask a question. I would like to inform all parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to your host, Mr. Brian Beams. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Beams, and I'm a Senior International Trade Specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service Office located in northern New Jersey. Also, we have today on the line my colleague Anthony Sargis, who is also a Senior Trade Specialist who sits in the Connecticut office. On behalf of the U.S. Commercial Service, the Connecticut, New Jersey, San Diego, and Imperial District Export Councils, and OFS Vitel, we welcome all of you to today's webinar titled Developing a Corporate Export Management and Compliance Program. Couple of items to note before we get started. Be sure you are connected using both your telephone and the online WebEx platform, which enables you to see the visual presentation. Also, all telephone lines are currently muted. We will open the lines up for questions at the end of the presentation. We will also take questions submitted through the chat Q&A features on the WebEx platform. I'd like to take a minute to inform the audience about the U.S. Commercial Service. We are the trade and investment arm of the U.S. federal government. We are a division of the International Trade Administration. Our mission is simple. It is to promote U.S. exports, protect U.S. commercial interests abroad, and facilitate foreign direct investment in America. We have offices all around the world. Domestically, we are located in almost every state with 108 offices nationwide. Internationally, we have offices in over 70 countries. These offices are within your embassies and consulates around the world. Finally, our website URL has changed. Please note that all U.S. commercial service information can now be found on www.trade.gov. Here's a list of our remaining webinars for the series. All 10 webinars will be recorded, and presentations will be forwarded to you every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Operator,
now I'd like to introduce...
Excuse me, Brian, for once again, I just need the host role back from the operator so I can set up the deck for Jose's presentation. Sorry.
And I can continue to go. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Jose Abrantes. Jose is the Senior Manager of Global Trade Compliance at OFS Vitel. In this capacity, he oversees the company's 6 U.S. locations and the 5 global manufacturing sites in China, Denmark, Germany, Morocco, and Russia. Jose has implemented an export and import compliance program for the company with emphasis on training and awareness, technology controls, customer screening, record keeping, as well as custom programs such as duty drawbacks and product classification reviews. Prior to joining OFS, Jose worked for Perkin-Elmer as their global and regional export compliance manager. He has also worked as the import-export coordinator and administrator for Canberra Industries. He is a member of the Connecticut District Export Council and a graduate of Brigham Young University. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jose.
Thank you very much. Do I have my slides back on?
So give me 1 second here. I'm working on something.
Not a problem. In the meantime, hello everyone. It's a good opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you for joining. We'll be breaking up throughout the presentation to review some questions. So don't feel free to use the Q&A and put in some questions there as you see fit. We'll have a Q&A in the end as well, so we'll be able to address the questions either some during the presentation and some towards the end of our presentation. So, well, thank you for joining. Whenever you are, your offices, your homes, your basement offices these days. and thank you for joining. Today we'll be talking about developing a corporate export compliance, export management and compliance program. A little bit about OFS right now, just so you understand where I'm coming from at this point. OFS Vital we are a telecommunication company. We are a cutting-edge fiber optic technology company, telecommunications, specialty fibers. We cover a variety of industries from telecommunication, medical, general industry, but also oil and gas, government, airspace, and defense. So a broad range of export controls and a broad range of issues, both in the import and export world. We are a part of a larger Japanese company called Furukawa Electronic, and therefore we have not only our own companies and subsidiaries throughout the world, but we also have a lot of relationships with our sister companies also owned by Furukawa Electric Company. And that creates a lot of movement of goods back and forth in our supply chain in very challenging issues from our import and export controls on a daily basis. How I see the function of trade compliance. Trade compliance is in a key supporting role in every company. As I can come up with many regulations that will impact how things are done throughout different departments and throughout different organizations, from the manufacturing to finance and accounting to logistics, shipping, receiving, even sales and marketing, R&D, engineering, order entry, procurement, and legal and overall how management addresses certain concerns. So we see ourselves as a support group through pretty much every function within OFS Vital. So going to the gist of it, I think the first thing that every company needs to have is part of a good export compliance program is management commitment. Typically, that starts with a global trade compliance policy that is written and signed by the CEO and has distributed throughout the organization, posted in accessible locations throughout the factory, shipping individuals, procurement, that is those that don't have it in front of them at least know where to get it if they need to review it. So that policy should be a living document. So we should schedule reviews of the policy and revise the policy as needed. For instance, think of if you have a policy that is 10 years old, you probably still have Libya as an embargoed country, which today Libya is not. So you got to make sure that you adjust the regulations and that's a living document. Also gives you a new opportunity as you have a new signed document by your CEO. It gives you an opportunity to push it in front of everyone again, to talk about it, to revive the policy. If you just have a document that is just there, then it just fades away. People may have it right in front of them at their desk, but they'll forget that it's actually there. And if you're like me, there's many documents attached in my walls, then I don't even remember when they are, even when I need them sometimes. So make sure that that gives you an opportunity once a year to look at, is everything that I say here still accurate? Any countries that needed to be added to this list of concerns? So it's something to think about. Management commitment also comes with management awareness. So, yeah, you're writing a fancy document that says all the right things, and the CEO signing it, but then him not knowing what he's signing it or not knowing what that means really does not go all the way at that management commitment. And that's why I didn't just put the first step being a corporate policy. It's really, first step is management commitment. So we need to have opportunities where we can train our executive team and key management so they can start understanding these regulations. So how we do this, you're going to report issues on a regular basis. Whether there's a compliance committee, whether there's board meeting, make sure you get a seat on the table, even if it's just 10 minutes once a year, to start bringing some of the issues that are relevant. Set goals and objectives and start reporting it to management so they can see what are the challenges coming. Set clear escalation guidelines. We'll review those a little bit later. And then set up a compliance officer. Clearly identify within your company the compliance officer responsible for enforcing trade compliance rules, as well as the supporting structure on the, like, for instance, site level with advocates or compliance personnel that can feed all that information. So my compliance policy does a couple things. One, evokes the authority that I have and my team has on a regular basis to say no. It clearly states that, and there's a variety of policies out there, so I didn't want to focus on mine too much, but should clearly focus on we as a company are going to comply with all rules and regulations in the U.S. government or anywhere that we operate in. We are not going to violate any rules and regulations. That should be clearly signed there. So if there's ever any temptation by anyone to kind of circumvent, this is a document that your shipping clerk may have and say, I'm not doing that because here, according to my CEO, I'm not allowed to do that. And so it does give power to people that are doing day-to-day operations to say no to people above them, clearly stating that we're not doing anything that violates U.S. export regulations. There's risk. There's risk in export compliance. So one of the things is that we need to do as compliance people is to identify the risks to our companies. Now, most of us know what those risks are on the compliance, but it's clear to sometimes advertise those loud and clear. If there's a competitor of ours that something bad happened to them, we should be advertising loud and clear to our executive team. Obviously, there are financial risks with fines and penalties. There is the risk of jail time, depending how bad of an issue it is. It could be an export ban. A company may be not allowed to do any exports for a given period of time. Or I like how the Department of Commerce has been a little more incisive this saying, we're not going to remove your export control program, but we are going to not allow you to do any exports to China and Russia. Be cut in a little more incisive and more specific, but even then it hurts the bottom line of the company. And obviously news, bad advertising, free advertising in the press with the bad, everybody know that you did something bad. It's also a big risk. So how do you know your risk assessment? You got to measure your risk by assessing, and you start that by know your product. Obviously, in my years as a compliance manager, I started with the nuclear radiation detection equipment company, and then I was in the life analytical science instruments, and now on optical fiber product. The risk is different. The product is different. The audience, the customers are different. So I need to understand, based on my product, these are the risks that I have. This is what my product can be turned into or can go into that may impact in a bad way my company. Know your customers and industry. So understanding that for this particular, and it may be a variety. You may say for this particular product, this is my known customers in industry, and these are my risks. But I may have another facility, another plant, where it's a different product that has different known customers and known industries. So I may have to operate different levels at different sites, at different risk levels. So map out our internal process. Understand how we go from developing a new product to assessing the whole risk, export controls, and identifying the limitations of our program. Map our sales distribution network. Right now, I don't have a broader reseller distribution network as I had in my old company, but we had a lot of distributors and resellers at PerkinElmer, and it was important to understand and train that distribution network as well, because they were on the front line, so they needed to understand what they did had implications. So identify where the risk is. If you have your own factory or your own entity, maybe less risk than if you have a reseller that is a new partner that you don't understand. On that too, identify your logistics partners. Make sure that if you are the one carrying all your freight, make sure you deal with partners that you rely on and you kind of mitigate your risk that way as well. So review compliance guidelines and measure your program against it, right? Often, guidelines have changed. The recent regulations with Venezuela, China, and Russia required me to review the guidelines that I had and measure them against my program into those countries and know how we're going to do it. So clearly, don't be afraid of measuring up yourself against compliance guidelines. Identify areas of improvement. Small is an example of different sites in how I put the different levels of this whole training today, and see how each of the sites were measuring against what I expected them to do. So we had a green, a yellow, or red in this case. I don't think any was in red. It may have been. I may have changed it to look good for the presentation. So when you're looking at export compliance, you think about different levels of restrictions and fundamental questions that you ask. So what country are my products going to? What is this product? Is this product in particular have any controls that I need to worry about? And then who's the end user? Do I know this party, and who is going to be using this product? And then for what application? What's the end use? Is this something that can be used for something other than a good use? Can it be used for dual use? And so there you ask the questions: where, what, to whom, and for what purpose. So typically, if you know these 4 fundamental questions for every transaction in your company, you probably have most of the answers to kind of satisfy the government and to satisfy your own needs to have this information to do a proper license determination and compliance decision. So look at the first question: what country-specific issues, right? So you have embargoed countries: Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Sudan. It's a little bit different, complicated these years. Then you have restricted countries, right? China and Russia. Russia not being an embargo country that we allow to do business with, there are many restrictions on specific entities and specific end users in Russia as well as in China. So even though you are allowed to do business in those countries, may have some restrictions based on your product or on the customer. So again, going back to that risk assessment, understanding your risk as you go into these countries based on your product, based on your customers. And then, put some kind of system control in place, flag or block embargo countries or restricted destinations in your system, or if it's a manual process, make sure that you have some way of preventing from you to go to that location. Establish when orders are allowed to be entered into the system, where are you going to conduct your compliance review, and make sure that you have that country-specific controls in place, system controls in place. The second we're talking about is product, right? Product export control jurisdiction. So what is my product, and what kind of controls does my product have? The U.S. government allows you to self-classify, so go into the regulations, and based on your product, look for where's the fit into the EAR or the ITAR, and allows you to self-classify. Now, just because you're allowed to, that doesn't mean you should always do it. Because if you self-classify, you better be right, because you're making a lot of decisions based on your self-classification. So this is kind of the mix that I use. A lot of times, if there is a new product where I feel like there's the potential for military implications, whether genesis of the product came from a military, how it was designed, and you can go for a commodity jurisdiction with the Department of State. You get a formal CJ, and in that CJ, they'll tell you whether the product is Department of State or Department of Commerce, right? So that's something that you should know, you should do if you're not 100% sure. Now, military products fall under Department of State. Dual-use products typically fall under Department of Commerce. And the dual-use is a product that can be used both for a commercial application and for a military application. So I have optical fiber cables that will go into your in-flight entertainment system on the plane, but that communication can also go into a military application. The product is a clear dual-use product. It can be used for both military and commercial planes. Now, if you know that your product is not ITAR, that is commerce, you can go for formal CCATs, commodity classification process. In there, in the CCATs, the government, the Department of Commerce will tell you or will validate if the ECCN that you think. They're not doing all the work for you. They expect you to put forward one ECCN and say, I believe that my product is controlled as such. And they'll validate if that is true, or if they don't agree with you, they'll give you another one and say, no, that's not it. We think that is this other one. So now at least if you go through a CJ process for a new commodity and you go for a formal CCAT, now you have something from the government. So what I do is I typically have a formal CCAT, and then I self-classify like items. So, or if we have created a new version of that product that is similar but not enough to kind of get out of to another ECCN or put it into ITAR, then I would self-classify and I would document the reasons for my self-classification. Again, all three are tools that are available. So at any point in time, you need to go through this process where with assistance of the government or yourself, where do your products fit, right? So you have to put the proper export controls around your products based on your classification, whether you did it yourself or you gave it to the government to help you with that. Typically, I'll pull some engineers that I've trained on export controls over the years, and they'll be able to provide me some assistance as I go through the regs and the technical side of it. So now that you know that you have a product that is export controlled in one way or the other, you need to establish a licensing matrix by product, set up controls around the products that require license or further review. So if a product requires an export license to China, you better make sure that around that product, and that's not just commerce, both commerce and ITAR, you need to make sure that you protect, put controls around that. I'm in a current environment where we have foreign nationals working for our company. We have European nationals, we have Chinese nationals, Canadians. So I need to discern what level of controls are in each site based on what level of foreign nationals we're working there. And then I also talked earlier about how we are part of a much larger international company with a Japanese parent. So we got to make sure that we don't share or overshare technology that we are not allowed to certain countries and to certain partners, subsidiaries, or even sister companies in other countries. So it's very easy for technical data to move to foreign nationals that work within your facility, but it's also very easy to technical data to move to your parent company when you're trying to get an approval for additional money to buy additional tools or things like that. So you've got to make sure you put the proper controls based on your classification that you come up with. So this is step by step, right? You understand now what the controls are because you have your ECCN or it's ITAR, and now you need to design the controls for each facility based on what kind of level of technology and product controls is there. So if possible, you put in a lot of this data into your ERP system, and you can store HTSs, ECCNs, USML codes in SAP, and you can use that. But you don't necessarily have to, depending what kind of, how big you are, what's depending on kind of ERP system. Sometimes if you're having a smaller shop, you can handle this in a much smaller scale. But with complexity that you may have, then you have to deal with a lot of problems. So we currently sell pretty much to every country out there. And so we need to make sure that we have end-user product-specific controls. So end-user controls, we need to collect information about who is our end user. And I say end-user product-specific controls because if the product is a EAR 99 or something that's only controlled for AT, I may put a different level of controls on the day-to-day operations of, let's say, optical fiber that is classified under 5A991, has very minimum control level, versus if I am doing a directed energy, a laser that is either ITAR or that is controlled under commerce, depending on the level. So I may, depending on the country and depending on my product, I may put in different levels of how deep I want to get on the information. But collect end-user information and screen all transactions. So anytime that there's a new order coming in, we should be screening. Anytime there's a new party, a new customer that comes in, we should be screening them. Now, there are many, for that, you should probably adopt a screening tool. So there's many software providers out there that offer combined screening tools. The U.S. government has also done a very good job to consolidate all the different U.S. lists that are out there. So we can, in my previous companies, you can integrate tool within your ERP system, so you're screening every time a new partner is created, anytime a new order is created, right before shipping, at different stages to make sure, because the regulations do change often, and you may be caught between the time a new customer is created to the time you actually ship to them. Now that partner may be on a bad guy list, and you need to know. So there are also a lot of service providers that do web-based tools that you can contract, and that works as well. It's a more manual process, but it's also a cheaper process. And you can screen, and some of those, the advantages potentially for me is that we'll not only screen the U.S. list, but the one I have will screen against the U.S. lists, the Japanese, the UN, the UK, the German list, the EU list. So because I have companies and subsidiaries in a lot of those places, it helps me cast a broader net on my screening. So, I mean, then the process is normal, right? You have your business partner or intermediary party that comes in, you put it in with the software, and we'll compare against all the evil bad guys that are out there, and like with an evil mustache, like all evil guys must have. And then if there's a potential match, the software will either, if it's integrated, block the order, or if it's not integrated, will tell you this is the reason why it's blocked. And then you can review that and see, okay, why is this a block? And from that, make a determination whether you can proceed with the order or if the license is required, or if you just flat out run away from that customer and never deal with them again. I've done all three. So going to the last one of our 4 things that you need to look at, you also have end-use specific controls. And you'll know that based on your own product, right? If you are making tennis shoes, well, what are the chances that tennis shoes are going to be used for a nuclear proliferation program? Probably remotely. Not likely to be the case. But if you know, for instance, in my first company, we did nuclear radiation detection equipment. So all our customers were in India, Pakistan, Russia, Israel, U.S., France. We knew right away what our products are going to be used for. Then we just need to figure out if they were legitimate or not. So collect end-user information. Is the end user appropriate for the commodities? And with optical fiber, it's very interesting because, we have a variety of different flavors of optical fiber, the most common being the telecommunication fiber that we all get and we're using today, to more sophisticated fiber that can be used for oil and drill, for sensing, for medical applications. So when a customer will come and ask us for a different kind of fiber that has typically more military applications or can have a dual-use application, we definitely will need to dig a little bit more. So also set up a process within your customer service, your shipping team, that they know how to identify red flags. Provide training to say, okay, anytime one of these things happen, you got to flag it. You got to tell me. You got to question further. I know your job is mostly just keying in and doing your order entry, but if there's something that is funny about this transaction that is unusual, you need to stop. You need to take the process a little further by investigating more about who the end user really is, what's the end use. So make sure that you set up a good red flags process. And if any of you have done training on red flags, every time I give training to my team on red flags, for the next 2 to 3 months, I'm going to get a lot of emails, a lot of things that say, should I be concerned about this? Should I be concerned about that? Which is great. Afterwards, it kind of dies out. For a whole rest of the year, I never hear about red flags. So to make sure that keep that in mind, that they stay aware and in fresh of their mind that they need to be doing something more if there's something suspicious that they may come across. So this is a good point. That do we have any questions at this time, Tony, that we can probably take it right now?
All right, Jose. Veronica, can we open the lines for questions, please?
Hi, yes. Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. To ask a question, please press *1, unmute your phone, and record your name. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you need to withdraw your question, please press *2. Again, to ask a question, please press *1. Thank you.
Thank you. While we're waiting for the first question, we're just on this presentation today, we're kind of doing a little halftime. If there are any questions, we'll address them now on any of the material that Jose's already covered, and then he's got his kind of second half of material coming up after this brief Q&A session. Looks like we have a couple questions that are coming in, so let's stand by for a second here.
Lisa, your line is open. Thank you.
Hello.
Hey, Lisa, how are you?
Good. How are you? I have a quick question about Troxler Electronics is our company, and we have some nuclear geophysical testing equipment. It has some sources in it. We are EAR 99. However, we sell this to distributors, not so much to end users. So my question is, how do you make sure your distributors in other countries are following the same regs? I wrote a letter about what the requirements are in the U.S. and that they need to follow them, and I had them all sign it. Is that enough? Because they won't know, they'll buy 10 gauges. They won't know who they're selling it to until they actually sell it. And they're not going to share that information with us because they don't. But is that okay? Is that enough?
It depends. So, yes, in a way, it can be enough, but you can also not wash your hands 100% and say, I don't want to know. I'm not going to ask. I don't want to know. Just don't tell me. Just do your thing. I'm going to give you this document. You sign it, and we move on. I think you need to create more of a partnership. And I know that not all resellers and distributors are created equal. There's different levels of a relationship with some resellers. So that's a great start to have a letter and make sure that it's an annual letter, not just a one-time letter, where you provide a clarification or links to re-export rules, transfer rules, that you provide them a little bit of knowledge about U.S. export controls that they need to follow as an extension of you.
Right. Okay.
So I think you need to look at them as an extension of you. And, yes, it's important that you have that document for you to make sure that you can say to the government, listen, I don't know, they won't tell me, but this is what I have.
Diligence.
And I inform them that they need to know.
Gotcha. Okay.
In my previous one at PerkinElmer, we actually had an annual training with all our dealers and distributors, and where we would go for about an hour and we talked to them about U.S. re-export rules and the risk. Again, it depends how involved you are and how much they carry your name. Right? If they are branding, if they are like in a complete extension of you, then you should probably say, well, this is going to show up on the news because these guys sold to where they shouldn't.
Sure.
And my logo is clearly visible. Then you need to probably go beyond that one notification letter that you do. Make sure it's the annual, and if you can provide training, we provide CDs with training, where CDs was a thing, thumb drives. Make sure that you keep them aware of their requirements under U.S. export control law, because a lot of times, unfortunately, they just say, well, once it gets out of the U.S., it does not matter.
Right.
And that's the mentality for a lot of resellers and distributors. And you need to say, it matters. It matters to me. It should matter to you. And this is why it matters to you. And kind of have that conversation a little bit deeper.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa, for the question.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Veronica, do you have any other questions?
At this time. Thank you.
All right, Jose, I have one or two more I'm going to ask you, and then we'll get going. So one question that came in was on if you have any kind of a short list of consolidated screening softwares out there that you would generally recommend.
Yeah, I think they're very, very well known. If you ever go to any trade compliance, they always there. But yeah, there's a list of some that we can consolidate a list and put some together.
All right, perfect. And Natalie just mentioned something about companies complain that collecting end-use certificates slow down sales. Do you have any kind of remarks on that? And any way to speak it up, I guess.
Yes, the government shutting you down for lack of compliance really kills sales. That's I think the first one. And again, I think, and that's why I've taken the approach in my current company. If it's a telecom transaction, if we are selling to Comcast, AT&T, or British Telecom, and we're selling them optical fiber or cable that is 5A991 with minimal control, I'm not going to ask them for an end-user statement every single time. But if I am selling them a flight guide that could be used for dual-use application, I am going to ask it every single time for them to provide me end-user statements. And so I think that's where you kind of work with the business and do that risk assessment. We say, well, the risk here, it's really not that big. But anytime I'm selling to China, to Russia, or any of these other parties that I identified as concerned, or every time I send this particular product, yes, I am going to put an end-user end-use statement mandatory as part of our process. And so document that transaction. So you can use that risk assessment to ease off on some of the transactions that are really lower risk, and you can just document who the customer is and kind of leave it at that. So you have to play with it with that.
All right, Jose, one more, and then we'll let you kind of get going on the presentation again. So if your company sells a product to a legitimate entity, but afterwards you find out a reseller sends to a red flagged entity, what do? What are your responsibilities? Well,
you can say, and we'll go into that towards the end of it, when we're going to be talking briefly about disclose or not to disclose or to report. If you had information, let's say like if you had an end-user statement and they just bluntly lied to you and you did all your homework and you did everything right, then I would report them to the government right away. I would not hesitate that. And again, I always talk with this about brownie points are not on the EAR or ITAR, but I believe in brownie points, meaning I believe that having that relationship with the Department of Commerce and the Department of State and with enforcement, when you report red flags to them, when you do a disclosure, when you find something wrong, that will help you if the day comes that you actually did something by mistake, that you can say, hey, listen. Say, oh, yeah, I know you. I know what you're doing. I know your program, and hopefully we'll ease a little bit of how strongly they come at you. But we'll talk a little bit for that further out towards the end of the presentation.
All right, Jose, thank you.
Okay. So the other thing that we need to have is export management system or internal control plan. When I come into my company, current company, my boss did said, well, we already have this manual that was written, 20 years ago, and no one knew existed it, and half of the stuff that was there was not applicable. So we had to start from the scratch, and up to today, I'm still working on rewriting. Every time we have a new process comes in, we rewrite. So make sure that you have an export management system or a control plan, written policies and procedures. So first, state what you do, and second, do what you state. Doesn't matter that you have like a really nice binding book like this picture over here that is just sitting on everyone's desk, collecting dust. No one knows what it is for. Maybe a fancy cup holder where you can just put your cup there or your coffee. It doesn't matter that you have a 1,000-page procedure that no one follows. So make sure that you start documenting your basic processes. Once I had someone tell me that, I would rather have a flow chart to document a process, and that flow chart was accurate and it can be written in a way that I can see and I can understand what you do, rather than 30 pages on screening that is so convoluted that no one follows and no one does anything. So that's why I say make sure that when you write, you're not writing a policy and procedure just for the government, although you do need to have one when they come and visit you. but make sure that you have a written policy and procedure for your team and that they understand it. And every time you change it, tweak it, or create a new process, that you train key impact individuals for each process, each procedure, and make sure that it's accessible to everyone, whether you have a company intranet or whether you have a share folder on Teams or whatever software you need, where everyone can go and say, okay, I'm about to issue a USMCA certificate of origin. What's the process? And it's clearly there. So make sure you update the information as needed. Mandate annual review of the procedures. How we do that? Well, in my previous company, it was part of ISO procedures. And we really didn't enjoy that much because, well, it was part of ISO procedures. But also that mandated that every year we had to look at it and we had to review it and we had to change it. So I liked that part, that he had someone was watching over to make sure that we reviewed the process every single time. It could be a corporate procedure that then every site has its own implementation based on the dynamics of that site and how the things work. I think I have different sites where in one site customer service are also the ones that are doing the shipping documents for exports, while other sites have a completely separate export shipping department and customer service department. And so I have to cater individually processes to each one of them. So again, make sure that, especially if you are in ITAR, that you have an ITAR technology control plan. My technology control plan is not only ITAR. I modify it to accommodate dual use controls that we needed. We have a laboratory where we have 60 PhDs that just come up with different ways of playing with fiber, with a lot of foreign nationals for different places all over the world. So I could not just worry about ITAR versus not ITAR. I need to worry about, well, ITAR versus a Chinese national versus Iranian national. And so I had to kind of deal with, compartmentalize, and come up with ways of control our technology plan variants by product, also with variances on a site-by-site level. So make sure that you develop not only a process for your shipping, for your screening, for your record keeping, but also how are you going to control your technology. Now remember, under the U.S., an export is not only when you put an item inside a box and you ship it out of the country, but if you are going to transmit the specs or the manufacturing know-how, how to send it to, in my case, to our Japanese parents or our subsidiary in Thailand, we better make sure that that technology is allowed to go there. So we got to make sure that we have a process in place, that we review the technology, and that we also compartmentalize it, that in a meeting we just don't have a foreign national coming in and all of a sudden having access to technology they're not allowed to. The complexity of it changes a lot based on your products and based on who coming to your facility, who has access to your databases, to your information. So this is what you have to deal with. And this is only on the export side, and I'm sure I didn't do justice to many more that could be out there. Now, I had way too much fun doing that slide, and that just shows how much of a compliance geek I am, because I had so much fun, and then I did another one just on the import side. But there's a lot. There's a lot of things that you need to consider. So if you start making a list of all the requirements as you're building a compliance manual system, you start saying, okay, how are we dealing with record keeping or AES filing? What's our process for AES filing? How do we prevent our product to go to embargo? So you can get any of these things, and you start building your procedure around risk assessment, around license exemptions, around voluntary self-disclosures or anti-boycott compliance. And all of a sudden you have a manual, a process that documents everything that you do. It can get overwhelming, so my recommendation is just to take one at a time and start tackling the ones that are a hot spot in your company as well. Every time I do audits, I start realizing, oh, people are, forgetting about this process, so I do training, but sometimes like, oh, I don't think we have anything about this particular rule, and start creating a procedure around it. We recently created a process for TIBs, temporary import bonds into the U.S., and then we created a process and we conducted training on everyone involved around it. So training. Train the trade compliance department. Budget, so trade compliance departments, or if you don't have one, whoever are the key people in your company to do the trade compliance function, they can at least attend one annual conference or there's a seminar. There's a lot of webinar opportunities out there right now, so make sure that they stay in touch and that they continue learning. Like we mentioned before, seek opportunities to educate upper management, board meetings, internal audit reports, incident reports, or even an actual training session if you can actually get them there. Maybe not at once, but sometimes you can invite one and you can start little by little raise up their knowledge about the compliance. The more knowledge they have about the compliance, the easier for you to get things that you need to do your job. Specific job function training. So you isolate the shipping teams and you say, what do I need my shipping clerks and the shipping experts to know from a trade compliance point of view, which that's going to be different than what you need your engineering team to learn, or your procurement team to learn, or your customer service team to learn. So you can cater the training to specific job functions, and then make sure you get regulatory updates as they come along as major things change. And then you can create a general awareness training for all other employees that basically they just need to be aware of what's going on, but maybe they are not key people or their functions don't touch compliance. You can do something on new hire employees, or you can put something on newsletters. But make sure that you spend the time training and raising the awareness. Don't think that you need to contain all the knowledge on the company on yourself. The more people in your company know your job or know what you have to deal with, the more help you're going to hopefully get. Believe me, no one else wants your job. At least nobody in my company wants my job. So you're safe, but it's good for them to know the requirements because it makes your life a lot easier. The other part is record keeping. And record keeping really is what proves your compliance. You can tell your customer, you can tell the government comes in and audits, and you can say, oh, yeah, I have end-user statements for every single order. Like, well, show me a couple. It's like, well, I don't have them. Well, you can say whatever you want, but you need to show. If you say, I've self-classified a product, you need to document how you got there. If you have technical specs, you put them there. If you have engineer that gave his opinion, you have that there and you document everything. So record keeping is what proves your compliance. Make sure you got your records for at least 5 years from the time of export, but then accommodate for additional things. So for instance, we did a duty drawback program that went back 5 years. Now I have to do additional 5 years from the time I filed the duty drawback, so I had to rearrange all my record-keeping processes to accommodate on some of those. So any company conducting international business is legally bound to retain their records. Okay, and what are those records? Import-export transactions such as quotes, POs, sales orders, export licenses, import-export declarations, transportation documents like every bills, payment information, licenses, but also you got to make sure that you have what we, transfer technology. You got to make sure if you authorize something to be transferred to Canada, you've got to make sure that at some point in time someone reviewed and said, yes, that's okay, we can transfer that technology to Canada. Since different departments are typically responsible for different records and to avoid duplication, what I've created was a record-keeping matrix. So I list all the records that I need to have, and I clarify the legal record retention for each record, and then finances sometimes may have a 7-year requirement, so you don't want to impose 5 years on something that finance needs it for 7 years. So make sure that the highest one of the company stays there. And then identify which department is accountable for each specific record. So if I need to pull them out together, and we don't have a central record location, so if I need to, I know which documents our shipping team has, which documents our purchasing team has, and our finance, which ones are in the system, which ones are hard copy. So build a matrix so you can know that. Typically, the government expects you to provide the records within a decent amount of time. You can't just take forever to do that. And then test your record keeping when you do an audit against your own matrix. And you can say, pull a couple of orders, international, domestic, and say, hey, I want to find all the records for this, and make sure that you can pull them out. Go back to the limits required and ask, for an older file to see what comes up. How good is your record keeping in your company? Other things that you need to make sure you register, your ITAR registration. If you have to register, keep that up to date. Review information on applicable renewals. Power of attorneys to trusted carriers and forwarders. Do never issue an evergreen power of attorney. Make sure that no more than 2 years they need to come back to you for a power of attorney. And keep track of who has power of attorney on their behalf. My company worked for now when I came in. They have the theory of if you carry it, if you're a freight forwarder, that you carry it, you cleared it. So when I came in, they had 32 different freight forwarders with power of attorney to be our customs broker as well, which created and filing the export declarations on our behalf, which created a very big nightmare as far as record keeping and power of attorneys. So really been reducing it down to like 2 or 3 right now to be more manageable. You have that control over it. Other registrations, while AES, which now is on ACE, make sure that you have that up to date, that you have to give the people the rights in ACE to do what they need to do and nothing more. And also, if the employee moves, make sure you remove the rights, that you delete them out of there as well. Really, auditing, monitoring, and assessing should be a compliance cycle that you're going to do on a regular basis. So don't wait for an annual audit to find errors. You can create monthly reports. You can spot check for anomalies when someone comes to you, when you identify an issue. You can go into the documents and review it yourself. Make sure that you don't wait a full year of mistakes in order to find something and to correct something. You can do an annual audit, and then you can do spot checks. In particular, on a site that failed a certain process or procedure, you make sure that you repeat that portion of the audit 3 months later and make sure that the corrective actions have been in place. So set policies and controls, monitor and enforce, make sure that they're being followed with training, and then audit and measure, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. You're going to review your compliance program and assess it. Don't be afraid of what you find, because I'd rather you find it than the government finds it, because you find something that is wrong. Maybe it doesn't have to be a violation, maybe just a bad practice that could lead to a violation someday. If you find that, you can correct it before any mistake has ever come. So that is something that is important for you to have that capability to review and self-assess, and then set new policies and new controls to fix, and little by little you're getting a better and better compliance program. So don't be afraid. So you can schedule yourself, you can train and involve corporate auditors if you want. If your company has corporate auditors, you can train them on what to look for, what to find. Just don't be afraid of results, okay? Ignorance is not a bliss. For me, if it's been a couple months and I don't know if anything bad went on with the company, with a site, then I start to worry, because there are a lot of transactions going on a regular basis, and there's always something that's going to fall through the cracks. So make sure that you stay on top of it. When you find an audit, you report those audits to management. Again, going back to visibility, don't be afraid. They're not going to just turn on you and say, well, you fix it. Maybe you can fix it. Maybe you just need more resources. Maybe you need to provide more training. But make sure that you report that. It's about them seeing visibility, understanding the risks that the company takes on a day-to-day basis. Address any issues and concerns immediately. If you find something, sometimes it's solved even before I leave the facility, complete the audit. If it's a small issue, I can say, okay, this is wrong. We can talk about it. We can change the process right away if it's something small. By the time I get the reports, they can say, oh, yeah, that's done. That's fixed. Some are easy. Some are not easy. Some takes a lot more work, maybe systematic issues, or a lot of more training, or lack of will on particular people on the sites. Measure yourself against yourself, your expectations, and others, what other companies have out there. Some companies put their programs out there, measure and say, oh, yeah, they're right. I don't have this in my company. I should have that. Look for best practices and opportunities to improve your compliance program. One good way of doing a quick compliance check on the export side is, looking at the customer purchase order, and then looking at the export license, if applicable, what's on the packing list, what's on the commercial invoice, and what's on the AES filing. So when you look at this five-way match, everything should be good. Everything should match. What the customer ordered is exactly what's on the license, which is exactly what's on the packing list, and is listed the right way on the commercial invoice with the right value, right quantity, right end user, and then that's what we declared on the AES EI filing. So if you did all of those things, then if you get a license, that should be also an AES EI filing. So you have an easy five-way compliance match from the customer PO all the way to EEI, and look at all those documents and say, okay, checked. So you can do that several times a month at different sites in different products, and kind of stop checking what you're doing is actually in compliance. Then I mentioned again, I think that a good tool for you to have is reporting. Again, these are some of my sites, and I broke down on a compliance audit on a variety of different topics that I wanted to target, and then I gave it a grade. There was a report that was more detailed than this, but for management, necessarily they don't need they don't care sometimes or don't want to be bothered with everything, but they can look at it. It's like, oh, you definitely have a lot of yellows in this particular area, or why do you have these reds? Tell me about these violations. So it's a good way of having the conversation with management to report to the upper management, both the site and on the corporate level, where are some of the faults, where are some of the issues that we're dealing with as a company. So find a way that works for you and for your company to make sure that you report your efforts on compliance on a regular basis. And then let's say you did audit, right? And like we were talking earlier before, you find out a potential violation. Something happened. So now you have to play devil's advocate, and I know there's some people with the Department of Commerce here, so I want you to cover their ears for a little bit. But you got to play devil's advocate. Do you have a case, pro or con? There's been times that I have suspicions of a violation, but to be honest, I could not even prove in 100% that it did happen. I suspect that this customer sent it to somewhere else, and there was some emails about it, and I missed it. So then now you need to make a decision, right? You need to decide if a violation has occurred. If you have the evidence, if it's strong, you do a full disclosure. You go in and you say, okay, this is something bad that happened, and then you do a full review. Has anything like this happened? Don't do a partial disclosure, because there's no point in saying, oh, I shipped this to Iran on March 3rd, and do a disclosure for them to then realize that you had also shipped to Iran in November and in October of the previous year. That does not help you. So when you find something, you go back and say, did I do this mistake? Is this something that we did, or this is a one-time thing? Understand the full scope of the problem. Do you have the issue anywhere else? Is this something that became a common practice among all my sites, and they are being disregarding, let's say, easy one, AES filing? All of a sudden, no one else is filing AES filing, or everyone assumed that the freight forwarder was doing it instead of them, and now no one is filing. Is this a general issue, or is this a particular issue to this site? So understand the scope of the problem. There is advantages of disclosure, of course, a mitigating factor, reduction of penalties. If you self-disclose, typically you get almost like a 50% discount, probably. But I think the key point is honest cooperation with the government. Most companies that are doing export compliance, trying to do export compliance program, and that they are not here to try to go around U.S. government regulations. Most of the problems that you had are in either lack of training or lack of understanding of the rules. So you can tackle that. Now, disclosure is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, and you need to make sure everybody understands that. There will potentially be ramifications of you disclosing something that you did wrong. But I believe I was at a BIS conference last year that about 95 or 98% of the self-disclosures results in a no action or just a warning letter. So there's good chances that you Hello?
I don't know. We have a little feedback on the line, I think. Jose,
okay.
Sorry about that.
So there's good chances that if you do a disclosure, that you're going to be fine. However, there are times that as a company, if it's something minor that you did, that you correct it right away, that you could say, okay, I noticed that we did this, let's fix it. You may not want to go through the expense, the lawyer fees, of all the work of exposing it out there for something that was a minor violation that didn't contribute to a weapons of mass destruction or whatever what is. So that is the company will have to do that. If you don't disclose, there's always the chance that the government is going to find out and come and knock on your door, and you're going to get fully exposed, right? So you have to do that, whether you're going to disclose or not. I typically, if I find a violation, I like to come clean. Again, the brownie points thing for me is important. I want to make sure that they understand this is what happened, this is what I identified that was wrong, and above all, this is what I'm going to do to correct the problem, or what I've done to correct the problem. So don't try to correct the problem or try to put the corrective measures up front before you do any disclosure, right? So you make sure that you tell them you identified something and you fixed it. And then you just kind of cleaning up the slate with them on that part. So both Department of State and Department of Commerce encourage submission of voluntary self-disclosures. Obviously, less work for them, but they also know that companies that self-disclose, typically they're companies that are trying to do the right thing, and they're not necessarily after American companies or good corporations that are trying to do the right thing. They're looking at the bad players. They're looking at those that are trying to go around and divert the goods and try to do things that are clearly wrong. Voluntary disclosures are an excellent indicator of the effectiveness of a compliance program. When you find something, whether you disclose or not, that you are able to find something, it gives you the opportunity to correct that thing that you've done wrong. So they provides evidence that your company, when you do a submission, it does say that the company intend to comply with U.S. export regulations, but also demonstrates your ability to identify violations and correct discrepancies. So that shows that your compliance program is on the right track, is a more mature compliance program, as it should be. So that's where you want to be moving towards. I talked a little bit about that. Corrective actions after a disclosure. Whether you list the corrective actions on a disclosure or not, a disclosure is an opportunity to, one, gain visibility within your company. Obviously, if you're going to disclose something to the government, you better let all the executive team know that this is something that you're going to do, because it may come back to bite you if they decided to investigate further. It creates awareness of your compliance program, efforts, and struggles. You may obtain additional resources from that. It may lead to effective change. So those are positives of a corrective actions that will come after a disclosure, after you get there. Corrective actions after an audit, if you don't have a disclosure to do, again, you create an audit report for management. You let them know what's right, what's wrong, what are some of the small things that concern you. Identify issues that need to be resolved before they get serious. You follow through in the individual sites. In my case, all the yellows and reds are things that I'm going to tackle right away. And then training. After the audit, a lot of my yellows are, these people seem kind of glazed when I ask them about anti-boycott compliance. And that reminds me, okay, train the entire customer service on anti-boycott compliance next month. So I'll do that, because now I have the opportunity to kind of bring the awareness higher. Escalation of guidelines. So make sure that you are involved in decisions relevant to trade compliance. For a compliance program to be effective, employees need to know who you are, you, the compliance team, what do you do, where can you help them, what is expected of them, who to contact, when to contact you, and how to reach you. Make sure that you have visibility of different places, organizations within your company. Make sure they are aware of who you are, from the shipping clerk all the way to the CEO. Create a process where issues can be reported to the trade compliance, and then from the trade compliance to the management team. Mergers and acquisitions is another one. My previous company it seemed like every 3 months they were buying a new product line or a new company. Make sure that you are part of that process, at least some review at some stage where you request any information in regards to sales and activities, country-specific operations, their policies, their manuals, review the controls that they have, any licensing activity, interview key compliance individuals. If they don't have that, that's also a flag. And then even after post-merger review, once you acquire the company, now you have more in-depth access. Make sure you go there and really, really review, again, and make sure you report any disclosure corrective actions as soon as possible. New owner is responsible for successor liability. So if you buy a new company or new product line and that has been an issue in that company in the past, you now are the one holding that issue. So you'd be better off reporting it right away as soon as you identify it. We covered a lot of ground today. So just going back to the list, make sure you have a management commitment, and it's not a document, it's the actual commitment that they're engaged. Do a continuous risk assessment of your export compliance program, a risk assessment of your products, of your supply chain. Write a formal written export management and compliance program that works for you, even if it's all in flow charts, but that is readable, that your team understands what needs to be done. Ongoing compliance training and awareness, not just for you and your team, but all to those performing key functions that are related to their tasks. Pre and post export compliance, security and screening. Make sure you have record keeping that in adherence to the regulatory requirements. Internal, external compliance monitoring and periodic audits. Maintain a program for handling compliance problems, including reporting export violations that you have. In compliance, completing appropriate corrective actions in response to export violations. This is an ongoing process, and you're never going to be done because by the time you train the shipping department, 2 of them are going to leave, and you're going to start all over again. By the time you have a process, the regulations are going to change, and now you have to readjust your product, or you're going to come up with a product. All of a sudden, you're going to be ITAR, where you have been very safely in the commerce world. So things change. Things are dynamic. So make sure that you have a compliance program that evolves and adapts to your day-to-day operations. That's it for me right now. So we're ready to open up for some questions.
Thank you, Jose. As always, you did a fantastic job, so I appreciate your time and conducting today's presentation. Veronica, can you open the lines for questions at this time?
Hi, yes. Thank you. Please press star 1, unmute your phone, and record your name. Your name is required to introduce your question. To withdraw your question, please press star 2. Again, to ask a question, please press star 1.
Thank you, Veronica. While we're waiting for the first question, Jose, how do you typically, with training as somebody that's been doing this for a number of years, how do you break it up between sales, shipping, C-suite folks? Do you break it up like that training? Do you do training for everyone? How is that structured, and how have you structured training like that?
So I have if you look at the presentation, let's say today we had probably 10 different topics. And so I would say, okay, screening is relevant to customer service. Red flags is relevant to customer service, but maybe customer service doesn't need to know about transfer technologies. So I would almost put modules that I have, and I just put them in for each department, and it will take out things that are not relevant to them. Engineering does not need to know about AES filing, so I would not talk to them about any of those export requirements. So I would just have a modules of all the topics, and I would just add and remove based on the department and the team that I want to reach out.
Thanks, Jose. Any questions that came in?
I did have a quick question here, which was if I recommend obtaining end-use statements for domestic orders. To be honest, you're going to go back to that risk assessment. If there is a new customer that I never dealt with, if there's a red flag, if it's a domestic customer, but he's asking me for some things that indicates that the product is going to be exported, or I don't have a relationship with them, then I probably will ask for an end-user statement for a domestic order. Again, if I'm selling to AT&T or T-Mobile or Google, then I'm not going to ask them for an end-user statement when they come every week. I know that relationship. I can measure my risk assessment with them would be very low. But, someone from Surprise, Arizona that I never heard of, and I Google their address is on a compound, then any order with a red flag, I would ask for an end-user statement, and probably new customers, I would ask for an end-user statement as well. So again, I would have different flavors for that. I wouldn't make a one-size-fits-all for that. Sales would have a hard time with asking for end-user statements for all domestic orders, but they can understand when there's a red flag on it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jose. Veronica, I have a couple more questions that were written in, but if we have any verbal questions, we'll take them at this time. Definitely.
No, sir. We show no questions at this time. Thank you.
All right, Jose. Are there any standard templates available that can help you write the program, a compliance program, or samples that folks should consider looking at or reviewing?
So I think the Department of Commerce has some pretty good guidelines. In fact, this list here kind of comes straight from them, and they kind of put a little bit of meat on that. So if you go to the Department of Commerce website or the bis.doc.gov website, they have some good information about how to start building a compliance manual there. And you can probably do some quick research and find some of the bigger companies that put theirs out there for everyone to see, so you can start getting some good ideas of what works. But scale it down or adjust it for you. Don't just grab a template from someone and call it yours. Make sure that it's customized to your needs.
Thanks, Jose. And again, like as Brian mentioned early in the call, every Friday, so this is a 10-part series. We're actually halfway home today. Today's 5 out of 10. We will send out by 9 a.m. Eastern time. I will send an email out like I've been doing the last couple of weeks with the copies of the presentations, the net replay recording. I'll get a list of some software screening software that Jose recommends, as well as some of the links to the BIS templates and stuff like that together for everyone. And I'll include that in our kind of weekly wrap-up email on Friday morning. Veronica, any other questions that came in?
We show no questions at this time.
All right, Jose, I'm going to let you give any final remarks, anything additionally you want to mention, and then we'll conclude maybe a moment or two early to that. If you have any final remarks you'd like to make.
Just, it's a lot of work to keep the program alive. I understand that, especially when you are working for small and medium-sized companies, that a lot of times you don't have the resources that you need, like larger companies would. But make sure that you are tackling those things that matter the most for your individual company, for your business, and you start covering, what we call the low-hanging fruits, but I'd say the big holes first, so you don't get overwhelmed with the task. But make sure that you can get allies within your company at different sites, where you have local champions or local advocates that buy in your message and allow you to kind of build the program from within. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jose. Jose, you always volunteer to do these things, and we all appreciate it. I've gotten already a number of emails from folks that said you did an excellent job. So thank you, Jose, for presenting today. Again, this concludes today's presentation. If you have any other questions, please let me and Brian know. We will be back on, it looks Thursday at 1 o'clock for export controls at trade shows. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
That concludes today's conference. You may disconnect at this time. Host, please stand by for your line count.